Today we're talking about trig properties, and there's a ton of trig properties. We're just going to go over the basic ones today. We'll get more into the other ones as we go through the course. But the first thing we want to talk about range. Remember that range talks about all the y values that we can have. So what our function can equal to. So for the range, the two most important ones are sine and cosine. And we need to remember that sine and cosine are always between -1 and 1. So if you think about the unit circle, right? The sine and cosine are the opposite or adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse is 1, right? So what we know about this is because 1 is the hypotenuse, the opposite side is always going to be shorter than or at sometimes equal to, but never bigger than the hypotenuse. Same with the adjacent side, right? That's one of the shorter legs. It can never be longer than the hypotenuse 1. So it's always going to be less than, sometimes very rarely equal to 1, but never greater than. So that's why we say that sine and cosines are always between -1 and 1. Now, cosecant and secant are the reciprocal functions of sine and cosine. So the reciprocal is true. So it's always going to be larger than 1 for secant or cosecant, or less than -1. That's not as important. You'll see when we graph it how it works, and it'll make more sense then. But again, the main thing here is sine and cosine are always between -1 and 1. It plays a huge role as we get further into trig, but also as if you... those of you who are going to calculus, it plays a role there too in some of the theorems. And lastly, tangent and cotangent can be infinitely large or small. There's no range limit on those two functions. Another semi-important thing is to find the sines in quadrants. So if we're looking at, I drew these 4 triangles, one for each quadrant. Now, excuse me. Remember, sine is the y, cosine is the x, and tangent is the y over x. So let's label these things. So this side here is positive, right? This, we know it's positive for our y because it's above the x-axis. Now in quadrant 1, this side here is also positive. It's to the left, it's to the right-hand side, sorry, of the origin. So we know the x is also positive. Remember, the bottom is the x, and the side is the y. Okay, in quadrant 2. Again, this side, the y, the height of this triangle is positive. But this time, the base of it is negative. It's to the left-hand side of the origin. So it's going to be negative there. Okay, quadrant 3. This time, our height is below the x-axis, so that's going to be negative. And just like we had here, it's to the left side of the origin, so that's negative. Okay, and then quadrant 4. This side is negative again, it's below the x-axis. But this side is still positive, it's to the right of our origin. Alright, so it's asking us on the bottom, which quadrant is sine less than 0? So negative. That's one way they like to trick you, right? They mean negative sine, but they're just saying less than 0. And then cosine is also less than 0, which is negative. So the sine, the y value is negative. All right, so y value is negative. That means we're looking at these bottom 2 quadrants, right? Because that's where these sides here are below the x-axis. And where the cosine is negative. Okay, so cosine is negative on this side of the origin, right? The x value to the left is negative, so that would be quadrant 3. Now let's look at the second one. The second one's saying where is cosine positive and tangent negative. Okay, so this is a little bit trickier, but we know that cosine is the x. X is positive in quadrants 1 and 4. Okay, good. Now tangent is a little bit trickier because tangent is the y over the x, so we need to use both signs to figure out the tangent. Well, in quadrant 1, both signs are positive, so therefore it's not quadrant 1 because positive divided by positive is not less than 0, right? We're looking for the negative tangent. The negative tangent would be in quadrant 4 because a negative and a positive, when we divide, give us our negative sign. All right, a little bit tricky, but once you figure out how the signs go in the quadrants, then it's a little bit easier. Okay, and lastly, we're just going to do some review work. It says find the remaining trig functions if sine is 3/5 and cosine is negative 4/5. Well, let's find the last regular trig function, right? Tangent is going to be the y over the x. Remember, sine is y, cosine is x. 3/5 over negative 4/5. And we said that anytime we have a complex fraction like we do here, we're taking the numerator multiplied by the reciprocal of the denominator. Sorry. 5's cancel. So we have negative 3/4 for our tangent. And once we have that, all the reciprocal functions are pretty easy. We're just reciprocating. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. And then cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. Okay, so just to review, kind of, make sure you keep your signs in order. They're easily misplaced and done wrong that way. That's like one of the number one mistakes people make when doing this stuff. It's easy, but they misplace signs. Alright, so that is it. Again, make sure you take your notes. Make sure you have any questions, you write them down, and then we can talk about them next time. Good job today.